Pretty spectacular.
Wow.
I'm here to bring you 8 pieces, but there are no Batmans or Hulks or that kind of bullshit in here. Down here we have Rolex watches. One of our specialties has to be the Rolex Datejust, because it's one of the watches that got us to the place where we are. It's the watch that I purchased when I was 16. It was my first luxury watch. I saved up for it. It was a Rolex 1601. It's not this watch, but it's a different watch in my private collection. However, I already showed that in a collection review, and I tried to bring different watches. So this is a watch that is the predecessor of the 1601. It's a 6305.
Yeah.
And unlike a 1601, if we're going to talk price tags, 1601 you can find a regular one for like 4,000 or 5,000 euros. A watch like this is close to 70,000, 80,000 euros for a steel Datejust. That's rather valuable, mainly due to the quality of the condition, and also the configuration is rather rare. As you can see, the dial has a honeycomb pattern on it, which creates crazy depth. The bezel is not fluted, but it's earlier version, so it's like milled or ridged, which makes it even more, I think, aesthetically pleasing and understated. And it's a totally original configuration with a roulette date wheel, the leaf hands on it. It's a pretty cool piece. I picked it up recently. It still needs to be serviced, so I will ship it out soon to get a full service on it, and then enjoy it for a while before it finds its new home probably.
And I love the date.
It's
the
dope.
red, how cool.
Yeah, it's
the
dope.
red.
So the even numbers are red and the uneven numbers are black.
That's so cool.
The dial itself is just the layout, the graphics, the font. It's just the epitome of a vintage Rolex, in my humble opinion. And it's just a very peculiar piece, because they made very few of them, and most of them have radium inside the hands and on the dial, and that therefore discolors the dial or even sometimes tarnishes the lacquer of the dial, making it look horrible. But this one is pristine.
It's so good.
Why? Because it's a no lume dial. They also did these, for example, in some countries like Japan. You had very strict import rules for radioactive material, and then they delivered them without any lume, just like this one. So now we're going over to the day date.
I can see it already.
Yeah,
oh my god.
Pretty spectacular.
Wow.
This watch I acquired rather recently. It's a uncommon reference with a baguette bezel, so that is very unlikely to. You're very unlikely to see any of them in a vintage reference. This is a very pristine example, if I may say so myself, that is adorned with a stone dial. So stone dials are also a specialty of us, and first of all, I'm a gemologist. That was my study. I studied gemology. Given my background, I love to combine my two passions, my passion of stones, so also, for example, the diamond baguette bezel, combined with a dial that is made in this case out of lapis lazuli, which is obviously blue. And by default, they're all unique stone dials because it's a natural product. So it can have different kind of inclusions. Usually it has, let me see how to translate that in English, calcite inclusions, which are white, and then it has pyrite inclusions, which are yellow. And depending on the stone, you have more inclusions or less inclusions. This one doesn't have many inclusions. It's pretty clean and blue. Pretty nice watch from the 80s, coming on the riveted oyster bracelet, which is also a rare configuration. It's an uncommon choice on the president, on the date, which is usually the president. But it's pretty cool. I love different watches. So of course it's a regular day-date just with a champagne dial, 36, always go 36, nothing bigger than that in day-date terms. But just a regular one is great to wear, and it's definitely recommended if you're buying your first day-date. But this is for somebody that already has 40 or 45 day-dates, then they want to have a special one.
I feel like Rolex were really experimental, or maybe not experimental, but creative with their designs in the 70s, 80s.
Yeah, definitely. The 70s is, for aesthetics across the board, an interesting period. And Rolex is known as a pretty conservative company. If you take a look at, for example, the design of the Submariner, which 6 years ago is pretty similar to today, just a little bit modernized. But definitely in the 70s and 80s you saw some funky stuff. For example, this example, and you have the Stella dials, which have a bright color. I can show you a couple. We have downstairs a couple of them. But that is, let's say, typical for that period, and therefore I also love it. This one, you're going to be surprised probably by the heft. This is the watch we just sold. It's an Onyx dial, so just like the one my colleague was wearing, but he was wearing it in yellow gold. A yellow gold example fetches around, let's say, 45-ish thousand. This one is fivefold in price because it's way rarer. It has white graphics on the dial, It is cased in an 18206 case, which is platinum. As you can feel the heft on the watch. You can even feel it through your stupid glove.
I've got long nails. I don't want people judging my fingernails. I've covered them.
So it's a pretty spectacular piece. Domed bezel. A lot of people don't know why Rolex. So last year Rolex introduced the fluted bezel on platinum models. Previously they only did diamond set bezels or domed bezels in platinum. And the sheer reason was they couldn't properly mold the platinum into like sharp ridges. So back in the days you either only saw domed bezels or diamond set bezels, and I especially like it because it has a domed bezel, no markers on the stone dial, makes it so super simplistic.
So clean.
It's so clean. To most of them, this is really stealth wealth watch. Most of them won't even understand why this watch is worth 2 times more than the lapis you just handled, which has of course diamonds, which is yellow gold, stuff like that. But yeah, I believe it's a spectacular piece.
That's unbelievable. What country was this issued into?
Great question. As you can see, the discs are not your regular English, German, French, Spanish, Italian. It has Mandarin discs. It was sold in 1991 from the top of my head.
Okay.
And it was sold in Singapore at the Hour Lounge. So you have a lot of Chinese speaking people there. And one of them wanted this specific discs. I'll show you a Paul Newman too in a bit.
Okay.
I'll have it downstairs. I just had it in, but that one is going to be for sale. This one is a watch that I enjoy very much, also because of the price point. Again, I understand this; it's a lot of money, especially for a watch. It's a 45,000 euro watch, but the rarity, the aesthetics, the historical importance you get in this watch, it's hard to see that within Rolex under a 50,000 euro price mark. And I think this one embodies a very pivotal moment for Rolex in the 1950s. It's a reference 6034. It's also known as, let's say, Pre-Daytona. So it's a chronograph, obviously. It has an oyster case, but it doesn't have, for example, the tachymeter scale on the outside of the bezel. It has the tachymeter scale on the inside, but it does have round pushers, which makes it look quite contemporary, yet still very elegant and classy and very vintage feeling. And I like the bracelet too. I'm a big bracelet fan.
Interesting,
Interesting. Well, obviously, you know Jubilee, you know President, you know Oyster. But this was also made. It's a bracelet made for Rolex by well-known bracelet maker Gay Frère, who also made for Audemars Piguet, Patek, Philippe, Breguet, whatever. And he also, of course, made bracelets for Rolex. And this is a piece of rising made for Rolex, which is uncommon. And it has straight endings, which I think gives a very cool, like vintage look to the watch. For me, it's a perfect size to wear. It's a tool watch, so of course I believe tool watches can be a tad larger. I never wear over 38mm myself, but I understand some people will go for a tool watch that's 40mm, for example. Yet I would like to advise everybody to steer away from those hideous Dates and Datejust that are over 40mm, because that's just, it's not in proportion. If you do believe you're a very big guy and you have large wrists, that's fine. Just don't buy Datejust or Datejust. Just buy a Submariner or a GMT, preferably not one with a maxi case, because that's something I also aesthetically do not love. But of course, you can have your own taste, and this taste is also taste. So
it's also terrible taste. So listen to it. No joke, I'm joking.
So of course I love Rolex. I love to wear Rolex. It's just a great watch. Anybody that says that Rolex is just a hype, or Rolex is shitty, or there are other brands that are better, if somebody says that, it's an immediate giveaway. They don't know anything about watches. If you understand the historical timeline of timepieces itself, you understand that Rolex plays a pivotal role. Sorry, I had to get that out.
It's fine.
Now we're going over to a very classic piece. This is a Cartier tank. It was released in the 1980s, and it is platinum once more.
I was going to ask,
Yeah, and instead of the blue numerals that you often find, or black numerals, this one has red numerals, and it has a red cabochon stone in the crown. It is very, very uncommon to find it in this full-size case, because usually they're smaller. This is the only example I've ever found in this configuration. It comes on a platinum bracelet, which is very, very appealing also on the wrist, the way it reflects the light. The finishing on the surface is just, for me, mind-boggling. And I think the entire design, and of course the importance of the square Cartier tank, it's just mind-boggling to find a watch like this. It's very, very hard to come by pieces that you haven't come across ever, and that you can't even Google. Because if you Google, you can't find any picture. So look how this fits on the wrist.
Unbelievable.
This is stylish, isn't it? Yeah, I love to wear this watch.
Why?
And again, it's also a statement piece because of the size. Back in the days, this was a very common size for gentlemen. Nowadays, it's seen as small. However, all the time when I wear small watches, I feel way more comfortable wearing too small, than too big.
Yeah, yeah.
And when I wear small watches, a lot of people actually come up to me and like, what's the story about the watch? Tell me about it. Whilst if I wear a 40 millimeter watch, nobody's going to come up to me and talk about it. And the 40 millimeter Day-Date and Datejust or whatever, or even 44 millimeter Omega stuff or shit like that, it just feels like those horrible Balenciaga shoes that are just 4 sizes too big.
Fair enough.
Over to the next watch, which I like to bring to the attention because it has historical importance in and of itself. It's a Piguet. And it's from the 60s. If we take a look at the backside, you will see Marine Nationale Aeronautique Navale, as you can see. So this watch was issued, it's an issued watch. It's a chronograph, of course, with a 30-minute counter at the 3 o'clock position. And it was issued oftentimes to pilots. Breguet made very, very small quantities of watches, many times issued. On the case back you see a lot of stamps, many of them being service stamps by the military, so they're pressed into the metal. And I think it's a very, very interesting watch historically and design technically. And I also would like to point out the difference within the Breguet line. I have here an example from the 90s, which has the tourbillon, which of course Louis Breguet designed and made. And you can see how far apart these are. This is a very gentleman-like, luxurious watch. Look at the finishing of this movement. And this is a tool watch from steel that is just no nonsense, just needs to do his shit.
Yeah.
It has a chronograph function, of course. That's a complication we have there. It's nothing near a tourbillon. But I think it's just beautiful to see the variety within Breguet. And again, I also believe Breguet is very undervalued. But given the fact that many brands now, let's say, take inspiration from the past, I would like to bring up the following watch that is just re-released by Audemars Piguet, which is the Star Wheel. And this is the original Star Wheel, which were introduced in the 80s, reference 25720. I've been collecting these watches now for, I think, 8 months or so. So I started with the Canchen Perpetual line, so the perpetual calendars, but the classic ones, so the dress watch line, not the Royal Oaks. I started collecting those, and at a certain point I think I had like 28. I made a video of them with 28 different models, because you can find quite some variety in there. And then I was fed up with it because I've been collecting those for like 3 or 4 years, so I kept, let's say, 5 or 6 of the nicest ones, and I sold the rest. And now I'm over to Star Wheels, which I think is a very, very romantic complication. Again, it's very shitty to read the time.
I was going to say, can you explain the Star Wheel?
I will do. So as you can see now, 10:45, look, 11, 11:15, 11:30, 11:45. So it works like that. This one is a pink gold example. It has a hand engraved dial. So this part is hand engraved with a floral pattern. I have different variations. So you also have a guilloche one. You have them in different varieties of metal. So you have platinum, you have white gold, yellow gold, pink gold. And I have 5 now. So my collection just started. My ultimate grail would be to get the Star Wheel with a stone dial, because they made those. Unfortunately, I only know about a handful of them, and most of them are in private collection. But Tom Chang, if you're watching from Singapore Watch Club, please sell it to me. Thank you very much. The watch we have up next is a very important watch that I wish to highlight, because it's a 565 Patek Philippe Calatrava. I kept out, as you can see, most of the high pieces. We of course also have Royal Oaks, Nautilus, not the new ones, but the 90s models, and I love those too. But this dress watch is the epitome of actually a tool watch, because it's even though it looks like a dress watch, it's a case made by François Bourgel, and it's a waterproof case, as you can see on the case back. It's a screw-down case back, so it was waterproof, which is extremely early for a 1940s wristwatch. It's a Calatrava model, so that is more, let's say, classic aesthetics, but it's executed in steel, and it was very unlikely for Patek Philippe to create watches in steel. So if you find a 565 in yellow gold, it will be 1/3 of the price of a steel example, because steel was just inferior for them. They were like, why would we make steel watches? We're Patek Philippe, we're above you guys, we only make precious metal models. And I just love the way this dial is designed with the recessed sub-dial, the 6 o'clock position. You have beautifully shaped leaf hands. The 12, 3 and 9 are applied the aging of the dial that also displays different finishing. On the outer track of the dial you have the minute track with a more glossy finish, and the inside has the grenade finish in an off-white color. And the way the lugs are attached or even more integrated into the case design. The flat bezel, I just think this is a marvel.
So I would advise, if you can come to Amsterdam,
Definitely.
please come and see these guys, they're amazing. Part 2 coming soon.